My parents paid $180,000 for my brother's medical school, but told me, girls don't need degrees, just find a husband. I worked 3 jobs, graduated at the top of my class, and built my own career. Years later, at my brother's engagement party, Dad called him our successful child, until his fiancée recognized me. Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Emily Carter. I'm 39 years old, and the day my father looked me in the eyes and said, girls don't need degrees, just find a husband, was the day I stopped asking my parents to believe in me. Instead, I decided I would believe in myself. My parents spent nearly $180,000 sending my older brother, Daniel, through medical school. They called him the future of the family. When I asked if they could help pay for my college applications, Dad laughed. Why would we waste that kind of money on a daughter? You'll get married. Your husband can take care of you. I was 17 years old, and I remember thinking, if I stayed in that house much longer, I'd eventually start believing him. So I left. I worked 3 jobs, graduated summa cum laude, finished medical school, completed one of the toughest cardiothoracic surgery residencies in the country, and the only people who ever paid a single dollar toward my education were me and a handful of scholarships I'd spent years earning. 10 years later, at my brother's engagement party, my father proudly introduced Daniel as our successful child. He had no idea the young woman standing beside Daniel suddenly recognized me, because years earlier, I'd stood beside her operating table for 11 straight hours. Looking back, people often assume favoritism begins with big moments. It doesn't. It starts with tiny decisions. Daniel received a microscope for his 12th birthday because he liked science. I received a cookbook because every young woman should learn to feed a family. Daniel attended expensive summer science camps. I spent those same summers babysitting neighborhood children for spending money. Whenever relatives asked what I wanted to become, I'd proudly answer, a heart surgeon. Dad always laughed. That's adorable. Then he'd pat Daniel on the shoulder. Now tell everyone what you're really going to be. It became a family joke. Everyone laughed, except me. Mom rarely disagreed with Dad, not because she hated my dream, because she genuinely believed he was right. She often said, honey, women don't need to make life so difficult. Find someone kind. Build a family. That matters more. I loved my mother, but every time she said those words, another small piece of confidence disappeared. Fortunately, there was one person who never laughed. My grandmother. She'd quietly hand me old medical textbooks she'd found at library sales. She'd point at newspaper articles about female surgeons, then smile. Read about women who refused to listen. They're usually the interesting ones. By high school, biology had become my favorite subject, then chemistry, then anatomy. I loved understanding how the human body worked. More importantly, I loved imagining how to repair it when something went wrong. Senior year arrived. Daniel had already completed his 2nd year of medical school. Every holiday dinner became another celebration of his achievements. When he passed anatomy, Dad hosted a party. When he completed clinical rotations, Mom invited the entire extended family for dinner. Around the same time, I opened my first college acceptance letter. Full academic scholarship, not complete, but enough to cover tuition. I still needed money for housing, books, food, transportation. I proudly carried the letter into the living room. Dad, I got in. He glanced at it for less than 5 seconds. Good. I also received a scholarship. Wonderful. I still need help with living expenses. He folded the newspaper. Emily, we're already paying Daniel's tuition. I know. I'll work. I just need a little help. He sighed. No. Why? Because you're a girl. I stared at him. I don't understand. You don't need an expensive education. You need common sense. Find a husband. He'll provide. I looked toward Mom. She quietly looked away. Grandma stood up from her chair. Without saying a word, she walked into the kitchen. A minute later, she returned carrying an old cookie tin. She placed it in front of me. Inside, every birthday card she'd ever given me. Every Christmas gift I'd insisted she save instead of spending. Every small contribution she'd quietly tucked away for years. Along with one note, dreams grow best when someone believes they're possible. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Grandma squeezed my hand. It isn't enough for medical school, but it's enough to get started. She was right. It was. The next 10 years became the hardest of my life. During college, I worked mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons tutoring chemistry, weekends as a hospital patient transporter. Medical school became even harder. Sleep disappeared, money disappeared, free time disappeared. But somehow, hope never did. Every scholarship mattered. Every extra shift mattered. Every dollar mattered. When I graduated summa cum laude, Grandma sat in the front row. She stood before anyone else during the ceremony, clapping with tears streaming down her face. She whispered, "I always knew." Eventually, I completed my cardiothoracic surgery residency, began practicing at one of the state's leading teaching hospitals. Life became busy, demanding, rewarding. Years passed. My parents never called. I never called them. The silence eventually became normal. Then one afternoon, Grandma phoned, "Daniel's getting married. I heard. I'd like you to come." "I don't think that's a good idea. It isn't for your parents. It's for me." There was no way I could refuse her. The engagement party took place at a beautiful country club. Most people didn't recognize me. After all, it had been nearly a decade. Dad looked older. Mom smiled politely. Neither seemed particularly surprised that I'd come. Halfway through the evening, Dad tapped his glass. "I'd like everyone's attention." He wrapped an arm proudly around Daniel. "This is our successful child." Everyone applauded. Dad continued, "We always knew he'd accomplish great things." I quietly stood near the back of the room, perfectly content to remain unnoticed. Then Daniel's fiancée, a woman named Sophia, turned toward me. Her eyes suddenly widened. She took one hesitant step forward, then another. Finally, she whispered, "Dr. Carter." The room became completely silent. Sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive with an argument. Sometimes it quietly walks across the room wearing a smile. As Sophia stared at me in disbelief, my father still had no idea the introduction he had just made was about to unravel everything he believed. The room fell completely silent. Sophia stared at me, as though she couldn't believe her eyes. "Dr. Carter." I smiled politely. "Hello, Sophia." She walked closer. "I knew it. I told Daniel your face looked familiar." My brother looked confused. "You two know each other?" Sophia laughed softly. "Know each other?" She looked back at me. "Dr. Carter saved my life." Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. Dad frowned. "What?" Sophia nodded. 3 years ago, I had a congenital heart defect that suddenly became critical. My local cardiologist referred me to one surgeon. She pointed toward me. "Her." I looked down modestly. It wasn't just me. It was an incredible surgical team. She smiled. "I know doctors always say that. But before surgery, you sat beside my hospital bed for nearly an hour. You explained everything. You treated me like I wasn't just another patient." Her voice became emotional. "I'll never forget that." My father slowly turned toward me. You're a surgeon." I nodded. "Cardiothoracic." He looked completely stunned. "But when?" I smiled gently. "A while ago," Sophia continued. "She's one of the most respected surgeons in the state." Daniel looked at me in disbelief. "You never told anyone." I shrugged. "No one asked." Silence. One of Daniel's future in-laws suddenly spoke. "Dr. Emily Carter, the physician who led the pediatric valve reconstruction program." I nodded politely. "Yes." He smiled. "I've read several of your published studies." Dad stared at me. "You've published research?" "Yes." "And you teach residents?" "I do." He slowly sat down. For years, he had imagined I never became anything. The truth had been quietly growing without him. Sophia reached for my hand. "I've wanted to thank you properly for years." "You already did." "When?" "You recovered. That's always enough." She laughed through tears. "That's exactly what you told me after surgery." Daniel looked from me to our father, then quietly asked, "Dad, did you know?" Dad couldn't answer, because he didn't. He had never once asked what I did after I left home. Not once. A few minutes later, dinner quietly resumed. People returned to their tables, but my father remained sitting alone. Eventually, he walked over to me. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him calmly. "For what?" "For believing your dream mattered less than your brother's." I remember. I spent $180,000 making sure Daniel became a doctor. "I know. And you became one anyway." "Yes." "Without me." I nodded. "I had help. Scholarships. Mentors. Grandma." His eyes filled with tears. "I should have been one of those people." "You should have." He lowered his head. "I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Before I could answer, Grandma quietly walked over. She smiled at Dad. "I told you." He looked up. "You remember." "I remember every word." She laughed softly. "I told you that little girl would become exactly what she said she'd become." Dad smiled through tears. "You did." And I laughed. "You did." Grandma placed one gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's never too late to be proud." He nodded slowly, then turned toward me. "I am proud." They're late words, but they're honest. For the first time in nearly 15 years, I believed him. A month later, Daniel called. "Can we have lunch?" We met at a quiet cafe. He looked embarrassed. "I owe you an apology too." "You don't." "I do." I let mom and dad compare us. I benefited from it. I never asked what it cost you. I smiled. You were a kid. I became an adult. And I still didn't ask. He slid a small box across the table. Inside was my original acceptance letter, carefully restored. Every torn piece had been professionally repaired. I stared at it in complete silence. Grandma kept every piece. He smiled. She asked a conservator to restore it. I gently ran my fingers across the repaired paper. It's beautiful. So are second chances. I couldn't stop crying. Epilogue, soft piano becomes lighter, carrying gratitude instead of sadness. Grandma passed away 2 years later. She lived long enough to attend the dedication of the new cardiac surgery wing at our hospital. To my complete surprise, the hospital board invited her to cut the ribbon with me. When someone asked why, I smiled, because before anyone else believed I belonged here, she already knew. Today, the restored acceptance letter hangs in my office, not because I need a reminder of what happened, because I need a reminder of who refused to let it define me. Daniel and I are closer than we've ever been. He's an excellent family physician. We occasionally refer patients to one another. He jokes that we're finally the medical team Dad never imagined. Dad never again said daughters didn't need degrees. In fact, whenever someone asks about his children now, he smiles proudly and says, "My son is a wonderful doctor." Then he pauses, "And my daughter is the surgeon who taught me never to underestimate anyone." My thoughts. Looking back, my parents' money didn't determine who became successful. It simply determined who had an easier path. I worked 3 jobs because I had no other choice. I earned scholarships because I couldn't afford not to. None of that made me better than my brother. It simply made me stronger than I ever expected to become. The person who changed my life wasn't a wealthy donor or a famous professor. It was one grandmother who quietly refused to let someone else's small expectations become my future. Sometimes, all it takes is one person saying, "I believe in you." Because when the world tells you your dreams are impossible, one voice of belief can become louder than all the voices of doubt combined.